Today's podcast on understanding the UAPA Act, UPA Act, a critical examination and global comparison. Hello and welcome to today's podcast. In this episode, we will explore one of the most debated and controversial pieces of legislation in India, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or UAPA. While it was designed to combat terrorism and safeguard national security, the Act has raised significant concerns regarding its impact on civil liberties and fundamental rights. We will discuss its key provisions, its criticisms, and how it compares with similar laws in other countries. Let's dive in. What is the UPA? The UPA, enacted in 1967, is India's primary anti-terrorism legislation. It provides authorities with sweeping powers to deal with terrorism-related activities, including the power to designate organizations as terrorist groups, ban them, and freeze their assets. Additionally, the law grants the government the power to designate individuals as terrorists, a provision that has often been critiqued for its broad and vague interpretation. The Act's preventive detention powers allow authorities to detain suspects without trial, which, while aimed at preventing terrorism, has sparked concerns about wrongful detentions and human rights violations. Key provisions of the UPA. Number 1. Designating terrorist organizations. The UPA allows the government to designate any individual or organization as a terrorist entity. This includes groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and individuals such as Masood Azhar. This provision has been used to freeze their assets, ban travel, and impose sanctions in line with India's international commitments to combat terrorism. Number 2. Preventive detention. The law empowers authorities to arrest individuals suspected of terrorist activities without sufficient evidence for a formal trial. This provision is intended to act as a deterrent and prevent potential threats before they materialize. However, critics argue that it can be misused to target dissenters or marginalized communities. Number 3. Punishment and prosecution. Under the UPA, those convicted of terrorism related offences face severe penalties, including life imprisonment or the death penalty. However, the law has been criticized for its low conviction rates, with only 2.2% of UPA cases between 2016 and 2019 resulting in a conviction. This raises questions about its effectiveness and fairness in serving justice. Criticisms of UPA. While the UPA is touted as an essential tool for safeguarding national security, its application has been controversial. Legal experts, human rights advocates, and social activists have raised several concerns. Number 1. Violation of fundamental rights. Critics argue that the UPA violates the fundamental rights guaranteed under the Indian Constitution, especially the right to freedom of speech and freedom of association. The law criminalizes dissent and protest, often using vague and broad definitions of terrorism to target activists, journalists, and students. Number 2. Lack of judicial oversight. The UPA provides the central government with broad discretion to label individuals or groups as terrorists without judicial review. This lack of oversight has raised fears about potential abuse of power and the erosion of democratic processes. The Supreme Court of India has also criticized the law for placing the burden of proof on the accused, making it difficult for them to secure bail or a fair trial. Number 3. Low conviction rates. Despite the law's sweeping powers, conviction rates remain low, leading many to question its effectiveness. The Union Home Ministry reported that only 2.2% of UPA cases between 2016 and 2019 resulted in convictions. This low success rate suggests that the law may be used more for intimidation and harassment rather than to secure justice. Comparing UPA with laws in other countries. Now let's take a step back and examine similar laws in other countries to understand how UPA compares globally. Number 1. The UK's Terrorism Act 2000. Similar to UPA, the UK's Terrorism Act allows the government to proscribe organizations as terrorist entities. However, it also requires judicial oversight when designating individuals or groups. Critics of the UK law argue that it can be used to stifle freedom of expression, similar to concerns raised about the UPA. Number 2. The US Patriot Act. The Patriot Act, passed after the 9/11 attacks, granted the US government extensive surveillance powers, much like UPA's provisions for preventive detention and monitoring communications. While it was aimed at enhancing national security, it has been criticized for violating privacy rights and curbing civil liberties. The debate surrounding the Patriot Act mirrors the concerns about UPA's balance between security and individual freedoms. Number 3. China's anti-terrorism law. China's anti-terrorism law has provisions for preventive detention similar to UPA, allowing authorities to detain individuals suspected of terrorism without trial. While it is intended to protect national security, it has been widely criticized for human rights abuses, including the repression of ethnic minorities in regions like Xinjiang. This highlights the potential for such laws to be used to suppress dissent and curtail freedoms. Global commitments and supporters' views. Supporters of the UPA argue that it aligns with India's international commitments to combat terrorism, including provisions related to the United Nations Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism. Proponents assert that UPA is an essential tool for preventive action, enabling authorities to address emerging threats before they escalate. However, these arguments must be weighed against the potential risks to democracy and human rights. Judicial perspective. The Indian judiciary has had several opportunities to weigh in on the UPA's application. For example, in the case of Arup Bhuyan versus State of Assam 2011, the Supreme Court ruled that mere membership in a banned organization does not automatically make someone guilty of terrorism. The court emphasized that an individual must resort to violence or incite violence to be considered a threat under the UPA. This ruling reflects ongoing efforts to clarify the law's scope and ensure that it is not misused. Conclusion. As we have seen, the UPA remains a deeply controversial law. On one hand, it is seen as a necessary tool for safeguarding national security in a volatile geopolitical landscape. On the other, it raises serious concerns about its impact on individual freedoms, due process, and human rights. While it serves an important role in fighting terrorism, there is a growing consensus that reforms are necessary to balance national security with the preservation of democratic values. The debate surrounding the UPA reflects a large global discussion about counterterrorism laws and their potential for misuse. As we move forward, it's crucial that we critically assess such laws, ensuring they are effective in combating terrorism while also protecting the rights and freedoms that define a democratic society. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We hope it has provided valuable insights into the complexities of the UPA and its role in India's fight against terrorism. Stay tuned for more thought provoking discussions in future episodes.